This is where kindness lives. Nextdoor's global podcast, your one-stop shop for all things kind. Here's your host, Jenny Sager.
When Nextdoor was created 13 years ago, we never imagined that everyday neighbor posts would spark a novel. But that's exactly what happened for New York Times bestselling author Tara Conklin. She loves Nextdoor and the neighborhood so much that she wrote Community Board, a funny, honest, gritty reflection of ourselves and our neighborhoods. And that's what makes her the perfect guest for this podcast. Tara, we're so excited to have you here today, and we want to start off by asking you, what does kindness mean to you?
Hi, it's great to be here. And yes, I've been thinking about this question because I listened to some of your most recent interviews. So kindness to me, I think it has a few components. The first is that I almost think of it as a verb rather than a noun, because I think there's really an action element to it. I mean, it's hard to sort of just talk about kindness in the abstract. It's really an act of kindness that means something. So I think there is this kind of proactive element to it. And I also think that it's interpersonal, right? It's like it's one person to one person. It's like a very kind of intimate thing that happens when you're showing someone an act of kindness. And I think the third element is that there has to be a certain amount of altruism in that you are really not expecting to get something back. Like you are, like true kindness is you feeling moved to do something for another person, and maybe it's appreciated, maybe it's not even acknowledged. But I think that kindness sort of has to have those three elements.
And that's when it naturally feels good, isn't it? When you're not thinking about, oh, did this person say thank you? Or, what was the kind of ulterior motive for this? Is there somebody in your life that you feel like has been particularly kind to you over the years?
Yeah. I am lucky enough to have a pretty wide, network of friends that I've accumulated over my various jobs and places where I've lived. But there's one group, there are five of us, and four of us went to college together, but we didn't know each other in college. And we all met in our 20s in New York City, and where we were working various low paying, crappy jobs and like trying to figure out what to do with the rest of our lives. And all of us really loved to travel. And so we started these trips, traveling. Every year we would take a trip. And we're now on our 25th, coming up to our 25th year. And every year the five of us go away for a long weekend. And we've done it through, we started when we were single. We've done it through pregnancies, marriages, divorces, infidelity, babies, breastfeeding, teenagers, all of sort of life's big moments. And when we get together, a friend of mine was like, yeah, it sounds like all you guys do is just affirm the crap out of each other all weekend. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of basically it. Like, it's just such a place of safety and support and kindness.
And just serious friendship goals for everybody listening. That's awesome. Well, I definitely want to talk about your latest book, Community Board. And I do want to read some of the reviews, which are amazing. So one said, a brilliant, hilarious look at modern day community and the distance between who we are and who we say we are. Insightful, honest, and surprisingly sly. I loved this book. And another one, sometimes we're not ready to jump. We need a little push. Funny, cinematic, and heartfelt. Community Board is a propulsive delight. So I love those because they really, you can feel the entertaining nature of the book. And I do want you to talk about how you got the idea, because I believe that Nextdoor had something to do with it, didn't it?
May have, yeah. I mean, it Nextdoor was really the original inspiration for the book. And this is pre-COVID, probably a year before COVID. I was on my Nextdoor board in the way that most people are these days. I developed a little bit of an unhealthy obsession with it. And just because as Because like maybe it wasn't unhealthy. I have to remember like my audience here. Not unhealthy, totally normal. But it just seemed to me that there was so much. I mean, as a fiction writer, we're always looking for stories and like the little kind of spark of inspiration and the little, odd anecdote that someone tells you or the person you sit next to on an airplane. But every single day, right there on Nextdoor was like enough drama and pathos and tragedy and humor and humanity to fill, a novel every day of the week. So I really thought it would be fun and just a kind of a narrative challenge to write a novel just with Nextdoor posts. So like have the entire action of the plot come out in the posts. And I started to write that, and then COVID happened. And I had 3 kids, remote schooling at home 24/7. We all thought, what the hell is happening? The world is falling apart, and so I stopped writing. I mean, I just didn't have the kind of the bandwidth for it. And I thought, my God, who wants to read a novel when like the world is falling apart? Like but after a little while, after a few months of like quarantine and stress and anxiety and all of the stuff that we were all going through, I went back to that project. And first of all, I needed to laugh. I really wanted to make myself, giggle again. And I also was recognizing in a very profound way just how important community was in my everyday life and for my kids and for my friends. And to have it just suddenly and completely withdrawn was very, it was really, really hard for everyone. And so my take on the material kind of shifted, and it was less about sort of this narrative, fun task of telling a story through Nextdoor, and really more of a love letter to community. And so that's kind of what the book became.
And I know you've said before that our hometowns are kind of baked into a DNA in a way that no other place is, which you're kind of touching on. Can you explain what that means and how you think we all have this need for community and how that's reflected in the book as well?
Well, I was raised in a very small town in Western Mass called Stockbridge, and which may or may not be the the inspiration for Murbridge, the fictional town in my novel. And, I left Western Massachusetts and left New England basically when I went to college in New England, but then, every summer I was someplace else pretty much and have never lived there since. And yet, both of my previous novels had a connection to New England. And certainly when I was sitting down to write a book, where place was so important, the only place I could imagine setting it was my hometown. Even though I was sitting in Seattle and I hadn't, and I couldn't travel back there and I hadn't lived there at that point, 22 years, it still was the place I knew the most intimately, and I knew backwards and forwards, and I knew the people who lived there and the kinds of, the everyday rhythms of a small town like that in the way that, yeah, I think it is. It's baked in, the place you grow up is just, it's part of you.
Your character, Darcy, she also returns to her family town, and you are obviously somebody who has moved to a bunch of places throughout your life. How do you kind of rebuild that community when you land somewhere either that you haven't been in a while or that is completely new? Like, how do you get that feeling of home when you're new in a community?
I think it's really hard, especially the older you get. It's really hard to move. And I mean, I think if you're a parent, your children's community kind of by default becomes your community, the parents of your kids' friends. But my father is 81 and we're looking at moving him out of the house he's lived in for the past 30 years in this very, very small town in Massachusetts and into a, kind of a retirement community. And it really, for the past decade, we've been like, Dad, it's about time, you're for your health. And, but it has been so difficult because he's so intimately connected with his neighbors. And, I think it requires action on your part. You can't just kind of sit back and expect it to happen.
Definitely. It's a bit like dating, isn't it? Where you can't kind of wait for somebody else to take the first step, or you might be sitting there for a really long time. You have to just put yourself out there. Yeah, definitely. Well, we did some research around community connection, and we actually found that globally, we can quantify the number of neighbors that you should connect with to get a positive impact on your mental health and well-being. And that number was actually 6. So it was 6 neighbors for you to start feeling that positive impact. And when we say connect, it's as simple as literally just saying hello to somebody in the neighborhood. And does that resonate for you? Like, when you think about your neighborhood, do you think you know 6 people?
I do think I know 6 people. I think I know more than 6 people, particularly after COVID. I mean, my block, and I think this happened a lot, certainly around Seattle, but as community was withdrawn from us, people were really seeking it out in any way they could find it.
Definitely. Well, we did some research that showed that as well, that 2/3 of neighbors actually have a better appreciation of their neighbors and their neighborhood now more than they did before the pandemic. So you're exactly right.
But it does, like any relationship, it does take a certain amount of engagement and effort on your part. And I mean, that's one thing that in the book, my Darcy kind of goes through this period where she loses everything in her life. She loses her marriage. She loses her job. Her parents move away without telling her to escape her. And she returns. She loses her friends. Her friends are kind of jerks to her. And she returns to her home in the middle of winter and just kind of decides to shut herself in and just, she is an island and she's just going to be okay on her own. And over the course of the novel, she comes to the realization that, of course, she can't live like that. I mean, you can't wall yourself away. I mean, I suppose you could, but you'd miss out on 99% of life. So it's really about her kind of learning to re-engage with her community and to find people who she really can meaningfully connect with.
And do you have a Nextdoor story from your own life? Do you have anything that stands out? Have you gotten something weird off of For Sale and Free, or found an amazing local business, or anything that's happened from Nextdoor for you?
I actually heard this hilarious story that is almost so taken from my novel, which was a woman that I was talking to. Her husband was driving and he was reading Nextdoor at a stoplight, and he was on the phone with her, and he was like, oh my God, there's some person on Nextdoor saying that they lost an owl. Who loses an owl? Who has a pet owl? And then he looks up and there's the owl sitting on a tree branch right at the stop sign, right at the red light.
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, I'm not surprised, because in my neighborhood, a lizard went missing. And so my neighbor, who I had not met across the street, posted on Nextdoor that his lizard, and I can't remember the name of the lizard, but it was something hilarious, like, George Washington or something like that, went missing. And he posted a picture, and the neighborhood, the community, found the lizard in less than 24 hours. Then he posted this amazing post thanking everybody with a picture of the lizard supposedly looking happy. I feel like it was smiling, but I can't say if that was definitely the case. So I believe the owl story, because these things definitely do happen.
Where Kindness Lives will be back in a moment.
Hey, you know what's really great for earning some extra cash? Nextdoor's for sale and free. Basically, it's where you go on and you can sell things that you have lying around the house. You can even swap them with neighbors, like household appliances, gardening items, pet supplies, furniture. You can really put anything on there. It's really simple. Just look around your house, see what you're not using anymore, and I bet somebody is going to want it in the neighborhood. And guess what? It also keeps waste out of the landfill and helps the environment, which is really, really awesome. And it's so easy to use. Just download the free Nextdoor app or go to nextdoor.com and start turning that trash into treasure right now. Tara, it's really important at Nextdoor that we continue to support local business because we really feel that when local businesses thrive, communities thrive. And we recently ran a competition where neighbors voted for their favorite local businesses. And Booney Coffee in Washington Heights, New York, was voted what we call a neighborhood fave. The coffee shop has a huge table that takes up a lot of the internal space where neighbors can work together and sit around and kind of form these connections that we've been talking about. And so I want to play you a little bit from the owner, Serena.
From the start, we really wanted Booney to be more than selling coffee. We wanted to be about using coffee as a vehicle for getting people together, for building community, and that was really important to us as newcomers. We were moving newly to this neighborhood, and so it has become a really mutual thing where people get together and they meet friends and they make friends over a cup of coffee at Booney, but it's also allowed us, Elias and I, to make friends in the neighborhood and get to know people. It's Booney, this location is a really small location. It in a way, the size forces people to engage with each other. There's a communal table. You end up having to speak to the person who sits next to you. And even if you're there working on your laptop, eventually you need to plug in, you need to do something. And I love that. I love when people stop me on the street and say, hey, I met my girlfriend at Booney, or I met my best friend at Booney. And people do say that a lot to us.
Tara, it'd be great to hear from you why you think venues like coffee shops are important in the local community. And also, do you have a favorite one where you live?
Oh, yeah. Well, as a writer with children, I'm always looking for places that are not my home to to do my work, and I frequent a lot of coffee shops. In fact, certainly my first two novels were written in coffee shops, and they're amazing, local places and the kinds of interactions that you were talking about were, just saying hi to just having like a few comments back and forth with the barista or someone that is waiting online with you is a really wonderful way to start your day. Yes, I definitely have a favorite. It's called The High Spot, and it's here in Madrona, and it's been around for ages, even before. My sister used to live in this neighborhood, and she has this joke that the reason I moved to Seattle is because I went to brunch at the High Spot, and I loved it so much that I decided to move to this neighborhood. But it's like in a big old house, and like kind of rickety tables and really wonderful food, and it's not that expensive, and in the weekends there's a line out the door, but everybody's chatting when you're waiting in line, and it's a great place.
It's such a cornerstone of the community, isn't it? Like, I love it that my coffee shop knows my order. Like, now I go in and they're just, oh, good morning, Jenny. Yep, here you go. Here's your almond latte or whatever. So it's just like it instantly makes you feel warm and fuzzy, I think. That's a good segue to what we call the Kind Carousel, where we get to ask you all kinds of questions. So I'm going to kick off by just wondering, what is your coffee order? What do you get there at the High Spot?
I get a 16-ounce Americano with a splash of whole milk. I mean, I drink a lot of coffee. It's required as a Seattle resident that you drink a lot of coffee. And just, getting through the day and with the kids and everything. So I usually drink I probably have at least 3 coffees a day.
If you see a community board in, your local grocery store or something like that, do you have a little look?
Oh, I always look through it. It's always fascinating to see what people are doing in the neighborhood and what services. I mean, kids who'll come and mow my lawn and camps for my children, classes or things that they might be interested in, and new businesses, exactly as you mentioned.
I think it's really hard to walk past those without reading them. I don't really understand the people that can keep walking, because I do the same. I'm like, oh, someone's teaching belly dancing. Someone else is like a guitar teacher. I don't know. I don't think I've ever actually called anyone off of one of the boards, but I love reading them.
Me too.
You mentioned before that you read a lot also. Obviously, as a writer, I would guess part of that is just kind of, looking for inspiration and taking tips from other writers just by consuming their work. But what are some of your favorite books?
Oh gosh, I have a lot. There's a book called Euphoria by Lily King, which I think is one of my all-time favorite novels. It's just kind of a perfect novel. It has, it's very intellectual. It has a love story. It takes place in a very kind of exotic locale. It's incredibly moving. Yeah, I love that book.
Okay, so last question. You mentioned earlier that you moved around a lot. We know where home is now. If you could live in any other neighborhood, where would you pick?
I love Seattle. I mean, it's going through a lot of changes and issues right now post-COVID, but I love the proximity to nature. I love waking up and looking at the mountains. And I just think I think people are really committed to the city and really love the city. It's the only place I've lived where people, like, they go away to college and they come back, like they're born here, they're raised here, and which, most of the cities I've lived in, they're real transients, like people are coming and going all the time, and very few people, I think, go away and then return. And I love that about Seattle.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. Do you have anything coming that you want to let everybody know about, or anything that you want to mention that's coming up?
Community Board is out. It's available in bookstores. It's available online, wherever you buy your books. The paperback will be coming in early next year. Oh, and I do, for people who are writing, who are interested in becoming writers or learning more about how to craft a novel, I do teach. I teach at a place in Seattle called Hugo House. And I'm actually teaching a year-long course starting in September called Book Lab, and it's for people who are working on a book-length manuscript. Part of that class is going to be over Zoom. We're still kind of working out the details, but even if you're not in Seattle, still check it out. It's hugohouse.org online, and you can get all the information there.
Amazing. Well, thank you for giving back to the community of writers that way. That's an excellent way to give back to that community. And of course, if you want to go online or go on the app and read all of the amazing Nextdoor posts that Tara's talking about that inspired her book, you can download the Nextdoor app for free, or just head to nextdoor.com. And we cannot wait to see what happens in your next book, Tara. We'll definitely be keeping an eye out. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. This was great fun.